Greetings, and welcome to Chained Opinion Podcast.
Glad to be here.
Today we're doing a comprehensive exploration following the passing of Pope Francis. That was on Monday, April 21st, 2025, wasn't it? Just the day after Easter Sunday.
That's right. A very significant time. He led the Catholic Church for 12 years, starting in 2013. And of course, he was the first pontiff from Latin America.
A major first. And the global reaction, it was pretty immediate, wasn't it? We saw President Trump ordering flags to half-staff.
Yes, and Vice President J.D. Vance had actually met with the Pope just the day before his passing, so quite poignant timing there, too.
It really is. The announcement itself came from Cardinal Kevin Farrell, is that right, from the Dome of Santa Marta?
Correct. The cause given was respiratory failure happening in the morning, and, well, sadly, it does connect with his known history.
He's chronic lung disease, you mean?
Yeah.
And that recent severe bout of pneumonia.
Exactly. Bilateral pneumonia, which, led to that hospitalization 38 days. He only got out in early April.
So barely a few weeks before.
Oh.
Cardinal Timothy Dolan commented on the timing, didn't he?
Yeah.
Passing just after Easter.
He did. Reflecting on that significance, yeah. It adds another layer, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And the tributes, they really highlighted different aspects of his papacy. President Biden called him the People's Pope.
Mm-hmm. Focusing on his advocacy, for peace, the planet, the voiceless, the marginalized, a very consistent theme for Francis.
And internationally, UN Secretary General Guterres had a memorable description.
Yes, a man of faith for all faiths.
Yeah.
Which I think speaks to his efforts towards interreligious dialogue, trying to bridge divides.
That's a good point. We also heard from Australia's Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese.
Right. He mentioned the Pope's closeness to the people of Australia, calling him a devoted champion for Australian Catholics specifically.
So looking at his legacy now, his 12 years, there's a lot to unpack. Let's start with something quite personal, his burial wishes.
Yes, that was interesting. He didn't want the traditional Vatican grottos. He chose the Papal Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore.
Why there?
Well, it apparently held significance for him because of his grandparents, a family connection, and he wanted a very simple inscription, just Franciscus.
Franciscus.
Yeah.
Very simple indeed. It seems to fit his overall style, perhaps, that focus on humility.
I think so. It aligns with many of his actions and his chosen name, of course, and that connects to broader themes like inclusivity.
Right, the efforts towards the LGBTQ plus community, for example. His comments on same-sex civil unions certainly made headlines.
They did. It represented, well, maybe not a doctrinal change, but certainly an evolution in tone and pastoral approach. A more welcoming stance, you could say.
And another major doctrinal shift, his stance on the death penalty.
Yes, declaring it inadmissible under all circumstances. That was a significant development in Catholic teaching under his papacy, a definitive change.
Beyond church matters, he was quite active diplomatically, wasn't he?
Oh, very much so. Met with countless world leaders. And he was actually the first pope ever to address the G7 summit.
What did he speak about there?
Artificial intelligence, interestingly enough, addressing the ethical challenges and opportunities of, emerging technology, always looking forward in some ways.
But his relationships with, say, U.S. leaders weren't always smooth sailing.
No, definitely not. There were quite public disagreements with former President Trump, particularly over immigration, the border wall.
I remember that. And with President Biden.
Yeah.
Despite Biden being Catholic.
There was friction there, too, primarily over abortion. Pope Francis called Biden's stance an incoherence, given his faith. It highlights that tension between politics and, well, papal authority.
Absolutely. Now, turning inward to the church itself, reforms were a big part of his agenda, weren't they?
Yes, tackling some very entrenched issues. He initiated a major overhaul of the Vatican Bank, for instance, trying to improve transparency and accountability.
And the other huge issue is the sexual abuse crisis.
Right. Addressing the cover-up was a central and incredibly difficult part of his papacy. He took steps, but it remained a source of intense criticism and pain.
We should probably delve into that a bit more later. What about other internal church matters? His approach to, say, divorced and remarried Catholics.
He definitely fostered a more, let's say, pastoral approach. Softened the language, perhaps opened the door to receiving communion in some cases, through discernment. It sparked a lot of debate.
And he opened debate on other sensitive topics, too, like homosexuality, divorce.
He certainly allowed for more open discussion than perhaps seen previously, particularly during the synods on the family. But again, this often led to quite strong reactions from different parts of the church.
Which leads to the restrictions he placed on the traditional Latin Mass. Why did he do that?
The stated reason was concern that it was becoming a source of division, sort of a rallying point for opposition to the reforms at the Second Vatican Council. But that move was, itself, deeply divisive for traditionalist communities.
A real balancing act, it seems. He also appointed a lot of cardinals, didn't he?
A significant number. Roughly two-thirds of the current electors, the cardinals under 80 who will vote for the next pope, were appointed by Francis.
So that inevitably shapes the future direction of the church. Were those appointments controversial at all?
Some were, yes. His choices often reflected his emphasis on the peripheries, appointing cardinals from regions that hadn't typically had them, sometimes bypassing more traditional sees. This caused some discussion, certainly.
It's also kind of interesting his connection or perceived connection with Hollywood figures.
Right, you saw photos of him meeting Leonardo DiCaprio, George and Amal Clooney, Angelina Jolie, even Mark Wahlberg.
What was that about, do you think?
Partly his general openness, perhaps seeing them as influencers on cultural issues he cared about, like climate change or poverty. It brought a different kind of spotlight onto the papacy anyway.
Okay, let's circle back to the sexual abuse scandal, because
Okay.
it's such a significant part of his legacy and a painful one.
Absolutely. It's complex. There was criticism, especially early on, about missteps, like his initial defense of a Chilean bishop.
I remember that causing a huge outcry.
It did. But he did eventually acknowledge errors and took further action. He removed Theodore McCarrick from the priesthood, for example, and enacted new church laws aimed at holding bishops accountable for abuse or cover-ups.
But was it enough? For survivors.
For many survivors and advocates, no. There's still a sense that the response hasn't gone far enough, that accountability isn't fully realized. It remains a deeply wounded area for the church.
And this ties into his relationship with more conservative elements within the church, doesn't it? That was often quite tense.
It often was, yes. His openness on certain social issues, his critiques of, say, the global financial market, his perceived breaks with tradition, all drew criticism from conservative commentators and even some cardinals.
So a papacy marked by significant change, but also significant internal debate.
Very much so. But we also have to remember the sheer historical weight of his election. The first Latin American pope, the first Jesuit pope.
And choosing the name Francis.
Exactly. After St. Francis of Assisi, it was a powerful signal right from the start about his priorities. Focusing on the poor, peace, care for creation, that name really set the tone.
Okay, so that covers much of his papacy. But now, with his passing, something else always seems to resurface. This prophecy of St. Malachi.
Ah, yes, the prophecies. They always get talked about during a papal transition, don't they?
They do. Can you give us a quick rundown? What is it exactly?
Sure. It's supposedly a list of 112 short, cryptic Latin phrases attributed to St. Malachi, an Irish bishop from the 12th century. Each phrase is said to describe a future pope, starting from Celestine II in the 1100s.
And people claim it's been accurate.
Well, that's the thing. It gained fame when it was published in 1595. And for the popes before 1595, some of the descriptions seem remarkably fitting, like from the bony shoemaker for John the 22nd, whose father was apparently a shoemaker.
Okay, that's oddly specific.
It is.
Yeah.
Or Urban VIII's phrase, lily and rose, elements found in his family coat of arms. But here's the catch.
Uh-oh. What's the catch?
The accuracy seems to drop off considerably after 1595, the publication date. The descriptions become much more vague and harder to fit.
So scholars think.
The prevailing view among many scholars is that it's likely a 16th century forgery, possibly created around 1590 to influence a papal election, maybe to support Cardinal Simoncelli, whose coat of arms matched one of the later descriptions.
Interesting. So where does that leave us now? How does Pope Francis fit in, and what comes next according to the prophecy?
Well, according to the list, Francis would correspond to the 111th phrase. There are different interpretations, but after him, only two descriptions are left.
Which are?
The next is Gloria Olivae, meaning the glory of the olive. This phrase was often linked by interpreters to Benedict VI, Pope Francis's predecessor. His name, Benedict, connects to the Benedictine order, sometimes symbolized by an olive wedge.
Okay, so if Benedict was the glory of the olive, what's the very last one?
The final 112th description is petrusromanus, Peter the Roman.
Peter the Roman. That sounds final. What's
Yeah.
the prediction attached to him?
It's quite apocalyptic. It says that during his reign, the church will endure great tribulations, the city of 7 hills, Rome, will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge the people. Basically, the end times.
Wow, Okay, no pressure on the next guy then.
Exactly. And understandably, every time a pope dies, especially now that we're supposedly at the end of the list, this prophecy gets a lot of attention. People try to make connections.
Has anyone tried to link Pope Francis himself to this final Peter the Roman prophecy, even though he's meant to be the second to last?
Some have, yeah. They point out he was the first pope to take the name Francis, just as Peter was the first pope named Peter, or that he's from the Americas, a New World figure presiding over an Old World church ending. It's quite speculative, obviously.
And doesn't Nostradamus also figure into this somehow?
Some interpretations of Nostradamus also mention a final pope, sometimes linked to the name Peter or coming after strife. So you get this convergence of different prophetic traditions fueling speculation, especially online.
It adds a layer of, well, mystique or maybe even anxiety for some around the papal succession.
It definitely does. Whether you believe it's genuine prophecy or a historical curiosity, it captures the imagination at moments like these.
So putting prophecies aside, what's the actual process now for choosing Pope Francis's successor?
That's the conclave. The eligible cardinals, those under 80, gather in the Sistine Chapel. It has to begin within 20 days of the Pope's death.
And it's all very secret, isn't it?
Extremely secret. They're locked in, conclave means with key, until they elect a new pope by a two-thirds majority. It's a process steeped in tradition and ritual, designed to be guided by, well, the Holy Spirit, free from outside influence.
So as we wrap up this exploration, the death of Pope Francis clearly marks the end of a really significant era for the Catholic Church.
Absolutely. A papacy defined, as we discussed, by those core themes of mercy and evangelization, the field hospital image, but also one that prompted really diverse reactions and faced immense challenges.
And we've touched on the legacy, the reforms, the controversies, and even these historical, almost legendary elements like the St. Malachi prophecy that swirls around papal transitions.
It all comes together at a moment like this, which perhaps leads to a final thought for our listeners to consider.
Go ahead.
As the church looks towards electing a new leader in a world that's changing so rapidly, what's the biggest challenge? How does the next pontiff balance that deep sense of tradition with the need for, perhaps, ongoing change or adaptation?
That's a huge question, a critical balancing act for whoever comes next.
Yeah.
Something definitely worth pondering. Thank you for joining us today for this analysis. We hope you found it insightful.
Thank you.
If you did, please do share it, subscribe to Chained Opinion Podcast, and feel free to leave a comment with your thoughts. Remember, you can find us as an audio podcast on YouTube Music and Spotify.
Until next time.